Probably just these things. It's the women who are very
as log in the stream live most around the world.
Hello, hello, hello. Can we just, Agatha, just check with, there we go. It is working, sorry. It's always a bit like when you're on Zoom, isn't it? And people keep saying, you're muted, you're muted. You know you're muted. It's so irritating when they say it over and over again when you finally find the button, you know? Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Nick Nuttall. I'm a presenter with a Swedish-based TV company here, broadcasting from COP28 called We Don't Have Time. I'm delighted to be here for this very special event. It's a special event because it's on gender and climate, peace and security. And it's co-presented by the government of Finland and UN Women, live here from the Finnish Pavilion at COP28. First, I want to welcome Finland's Minister for Foreign Trade and Development, Vili Tavio. Are you with us, sir? Yes, you are. Could you please take the stage here? Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to welcome you all to the Finnish Pavilion, the first time in COP history. In our pavilion, we want to share Finland's journey and commitment to sustainability and resilience, underlining that actions speak louder than words. We are proud to host together with UN Women this panel discussion on the links between women, peace and security agenda and climate and security, especially in Asia. I want to thank UN Women's Pakistan office for this initiative and their brand and hard work to make this event happen. UN Women is Finland's long-term partner in advancing gender equality and the status of rights of women and girls globally. We have made great strides for gender equality in the past decades, but the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, climate crisis, and the pushback on gender equality are examples of why UN Women's work and mandate remain necessary. This situation of women and girls is especially vulnerable in conflict and crisis settings. We appreciate the excellent action UN Women is taking in their work across the globe, including the most fragile situations. We call for UN Women to continue its focus on women, peace and security agenda, which is essential for inclusive sustainable development. We cannot accept rolling back women and girls' rights, not in peace, nor in natural or human-made disasters. Finland has been long in the forefront promoting women, peace and security agenda, and we published our 4th National Action Plan in March this year. In the newest action plan, we emphasize even stronger than before women's meaningful participation in all aspects of peace and security and at all levels. Climate and environmental aspects are cross-cutting themes in the newest action plan, which is why we see this panel discussion highly relevant. The focus is not only on climate issues impacting women, but how women can lead climate action and resilience building. The new action plan includes new solutions and ways on how women could strengthen their agency in climate action. The discussion today concentrates on Asia and the Pacific region, which is home to 10 of the 15 most climate-affected countries globally. We will hear directly from 2 civil society leaders from Philippines and Pakistan about their experiences and solutions, as well as how they build resilience and peace in their everyday work. We have, of course, also other excellent panelists from the UN Political Department and our own Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I once more welcome you all to the Finnish Pavilion and give now floor to Sara Hendricks, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women.
Thank you so much, Minister, and indeed, ladies and gentlemen and wonderful panelists gathered here today. I'm honored to be joining you today as we convene for the inaugural Relief, Recovery and Peace Day at COP28. I'm really honored to be joining today's session, which shines a spotlight on the leadership of women at the forefront of intertwined efforts of both peace and climate action, and the ways in which those are connected. And I extend my gratitude to the government of Finland, and indeed for co-hosting this conversation, and really thank you, Minister Tavio, directly for your welcoming remarks and your strong partnership and support. I wish to also thank the We Don't Have Time for the partnership and pivotal role with you for today's discussion. Climate change, as we know, presents a significant environmental threat, but it is also a challenge to our collective peace and security. And it forces communities to redefine what the concept means to them. This challenge is deeply interconnected also with gender inequality. And in regions most vulnerable to climate change, and today we will focus on the Asia-Pacific region, we see a staggering overlap with high levels of conflict, with high levels of violence, but also where there are low levels of women's inclusion, women's participation, and security. In fact, there's some very critical data which shows us that countries that are prioritizing gender equality demonstrate greater resilience to climate threats. I found this data absolutely fascinating. Countries that are more prioritizing gender equality also are correlated with greater resilience to climate threats. So this correlation is quite striking. It's also still underexplored. More attention needs to go to it. And it represents, I think, a significant missed opportunity in this space more at a higher level. We are now at the halfway mark of the 2030 agenda, and Asia has recorded a regression in the Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action, while data on gender equality on SDG 5, as well as SDG 16, remains still insufficient to assess our progress accurately. So we need more data to see how the region and how the world is doing. We are at a pivotal moment where the nexus of gender equality, climate action, and peace building is gaining more and more recognition. And this is a good thing. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has highlighted the gendered nature of climate vulnerability and the unequal access to natural resources, which significantly enhances the effectiveness of our efforts in conflict prevention, as well as in peace building, more specifically. The thematic review on climate security peace building has also underscored the profound peace building benefits of the meaningful leadership of women, the meaningful leadership of both women and girls in climate change adaptation, in mitigation, and in disaster risk reduction. In Asia, women play such a crucial role. In climate adaptation, women play such a crucial role in resource management. As well, women play such a crucial role in early warning systems, in early warning efforts for disaster risk reduction. And it very much demonstrates the critical role that women's voices play in climate resilience, but also in responding to climate crises. And UN Women has shown that better understanding and valuing women's responses, women's leadership in the community, women's voices, specifically in terms of climate adaptation, conflict prevention, and in terms of women's empowerment, very much matters. I hope today's discussion will facilitate this more. We have the privilege of hearing from some amazing panelists today, from women leaders who have been pioneering efforts across significantly complex crises in Pakistan, in the Philippines. Their experiences are not just inspiring, they are also instructive to us. The establishment of this dedicated day at COP28 is an opportunity to amplify calls for stronger gender perspectives in climate, peace, and security. And we're so grateful that COP now has this focus. Today's session also represents a stride in uniting our commitments to peace, gender, and climate action. And this convergence signifies a powerful fusion of the women, peace, and security agenda. So as we stand at this crossroads of so many colliding global emergencies, let me reiterate a call for renewed commitment to the meaningful inclusion of women and girls in our collective action for climate and for peace. Women are not just beneficiaries, they are not just victims, but they are indeed leaders. They are partners. They are the peace builders. Women are the innovators. Women are the ones who are co-creating the actions and solutions to the climate and security crisis. And I can't wait to hear from you today. With this, I thank you.
Thank you very much. An excellent speech and a wonderful way of actually capturing so many of these interconnected issues. We are expecting the president of Kosovo to join us, but she's slightly delayed. I think any of us who've been at the COP for the last few days would be surprised that somebody has been delayed getting here, but she's definitely on her way. And so I think we're going to go to the panel, and when she comes, we can just break to hear her remarks and then get back to the discussion. Oh, there we go. Ooh, that's quite loud, isn't it? Heavens above, it sounds like NASA just before a space shuttle takes off. Just down slightly, guys. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. So let's welcome our panelists. I'd like to introduce them all first, and then we'll get to the discussion. We've got Amira Adil, who is there? Wave your hand, and there we go. Climate activist and educator, feminist, founder of the Pakistan Youth Climate Network and NGO 8climb.org. Is that the way of, how do you say that?
It's actually climb-8.org.
All right,
like,
it's just slightly wrong here in my text. All right, okay, good. Assistant Director of the Office of Sustainability at the National University of Science and Technology in Islamabad. Great to see you. Now, this name is a bit more tough for me, and you're going to have to correct it for me. I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong. Rufa Giam. Oh my God, I got it right. Peace builder, transitional justice negotiator, and civil society leader from the Bangasmoro Autonomous Region. Bangasmoro, super. Autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines. Associate professor at the State University there as well, and author of research on the impact of extreme weather events on the conflict in the BARMM area. Okay, and then we've got Alexandra Fong. She's a climate security mechanism representative and chief policy and guidance of the Policy and Mediation Division of the United Nations Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs. And then, I did pronounce it earlier right, didn't I? Because I know Finnish names are very tricky.
I know you can do it the second time as well.
Juha, yeah. Savalainen.
Perfect.
I can't believe this. It's almost a winning run. Deputy Director, General Department for Development Policy, Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Welcome to all our fantastic guests. So, Amira, let me turn to you first. As a climate educator, you've worked with young women and men in Pakistan's rural and urban areas. Why do you feel it's vital to unify action on gender equality, climate and peace?
So let me start by talking about what educating women does to climate change in the first place. We talk about mitigation and adaptation and disaster resilience, as the executive director said. So drawdown.org tells us that educating women and girls can reduce up to 68.9 gigatons of CO2 equivalent between 2020 to 2050. And they've given the calculations on how to do that. But the primary reason for this is because educated women are less likely to have more children, and their children are healthier and better able to to cope with disasters and such. But when we turn to the adaptation and disaster risk resilience side, women that are empowered and educated have a better chance at dealing with anything that comes their way. So for example, with the floods in Pakistan last year, if the women knew how to swim, that would have saved a lot of lives as well. So it's just little things like this. It doesn't mean necessarily the same type of education, the traditional primary, secondary, high school education that we're used to. It can be skill-based. It can be completely like coping mechanism-based. It can be anything that's relevant to what they're doing. So educating women and girls is key to solving climate change. Not to put the onus on them entirely, but it still would lessen a lot of the losses that we have.
Okay. All right, let's turn to Rufa. Your on-the-ground work in the region paints a vivid picture of women not just surviving, but actually shaping their community's resilience to climate change and conflict. What happens when these women become empowered and invested in by governments, the development community, the private sector, and civil society?
Okay. I would die a happy woman then. But actually, we live in a context of a very rigid patriarchal society. And despite the fact that women have committed themselves to be at the forefront of both rescue and relief and recovery after natural disasters and even armed conflict, which in many cases happen at the same time where I work in the Bangsamoro region. It's a region which is challenged by they're being low-lying and so prone to flooding. And because they are landlocked, they get all the rainwater from the mountains surrounding them. At the same time, they're also home to the different armed groups that are contesting the power of the state. One of them has just signed an agreement and created this BARM, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. But at the same time, this creation of the region has not spelled durable peace in the region. As I'm speaking now, I'm hearing that the other day, last Friday, during the prayers in the mosque, a bomb went off in one of the cities in the region, killing 4 people. So it happens also during times of flooding because now is the typhoon season in the Philippines. So it happens that both climate, extreme weather events like flooding and droughts happen when there are also armed conflict going on. But it's the women who hustle to survive, to initiate the facilitation of extending assistance to vulnerable groups, especially the indigenous women who are doubly sidelined because they are minority within a minority group. So, but they are not recognized. It's always the men who take credit for what they are doing. When they settle big conflicts, it's always the men bragging that we settle these conflicts, but it's actually the women who have done that. In fact, there are rescue operations for disaster events that are operated by women. The riggerless canoes that are used for ferrying victims of flooding are steered by women, mostly, not by men. So, but unfortunately, they still need support, not only technical support, but financial support for their food security issues because the women are in the forefront. The men tend to be embarrassed to be begging for assistance, but because that's the patriarchal part of the society, roles of the men, they lose face when they lose their jobs, but they don't make any moves to secure them back. It's always the women leading them. And in one of the fieldwork data we got, some women are even providing protection to the men who are partners in vengeance killing episodes, creating horizontal violence in the area. So because they believe that in Islam, the fighters don't harm the women, which is also a flawed argument, because many women have become victims of sexual harassment during times of flooding and armed conflict. So there really those investments for supporting women to upscale their skills, to upskill them in coping mechanisms, just like what Amira has said. They need to know more about first aid because they are the virtual first responders when disasters happen. The DRRM people just come later after the disasters subside. So.
Rufa, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to all this in the short discussion we have afterwards. Alexandra, UN Women advocates that the woman, peace and security agenda should be central to climate security discussions and strategies. as an insider in the UN climate security mechanism, how do you see this agenda reshaping the future of climate security?
Well, thanks very much. And actually, when we created the climate security mechanism at the UN in 2018, we deliberately set out to learn from the women, peace and security agenda since 2000, particularly in terms of how you could link global norm entrepreneurship with action at the regional, national, and community levels. But more importantly, I think from the start, we saw very strong substantive links between these two agendas. Women, as we've heard, must be right at the center and not on the periphery for countries and communities to cope with climate impacts and build sustainable peace. And that is also the message of the UN Secretary General's new Agenda for Peace, which came out recently, which calls for a paradigm shift in conflict prevention and peace building. And right at the heart of that is breaking gendered power dynamics and making sure that peace building and climate action can reinforce each other as they must. I think we've heard, yes, women bear the brunt of climate impacts often. Yes, women must uphold their communities in impacted areas. But I think this message that women are also very powerful actors has come across so strongly in what we've heard. We've seen women invent new technologies, deploy indigenous agricultural practices, promote forest conservation. We've seen women lead innovative local water committees, such as in Yemen, or in fact serve as mediators to resolve natural resource disputes, as in parts of the Sahel or Sudan. So to move this forward, we need more meaningful partnerships with women environmental defenders and women peace builders. They have to guide our work much more so going forward than is presently the case. We need to fill the libraries with good practice. There's a thirst for learning out there. We have to build this evidence base. We have to identify, invest, and scale up promising ideas. That will inspire others and show that this actually works in what is a doom and gloom agenda. We need to galvanize action, and inspiration works. And then we need bold leadership, including engaging with men stakeholders to share power, because this is about power, and to ensure the really meaningful participation of women right across climate adaptation, conflict prevention, peacemaking, and peace building. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Very, very clear points there. Let's go over to our colleague here from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The reality is that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Women, Peace and Security normative frameworks, normative frameworks are quite good actually. That's good UN speak. They're yet to speak to each other. Yeah, these two agendas. What's the urgency behind this alignment with women, peace, security and the UNFCCC process, and how has Finland been at the forefront of bridging the gap?
Thanks. And first of all, an honor to be here with true change makers. Perhaps if you allow, I'll answer that question by going a little bit back in time, because to understand Finland's agency today, it's good to know where we come from. Because, okay, today, we are a prosperous, stable country, but it's not always been like that. You have to go back only 100 years, or not even that much, 70, 80 years till the end of the Second World War, and you see a Finland that was already quite different and had lots of elements of fragility in it. There was still a lot of poverty. Majority of people were occupied in smallholder agriculture, not very productive, and there was a lot of strife between different socioeconomic groups in society. So how did we get to from that state to where we are today? Really, prior to any economic development, industrialization, and wealth creation, there were three important variables at play which all had a gender perspective. First of all, we got universal suffrage for all men and women, including the right for women also to hold office. And then we got the integration of women into the working life, partly because of shortages in the labor market, but then also because of very progressive social policies which allowed women to leave home. And third, I would like to mention also the emergence of very important women's civil society organizations that helped us to regain our sort of social cohesiveness during and after wartime. So, in a nutshell, we have learned firsthand how you build stability through inclusion. And it's been only natural for us to take this also into our foreign policy, really in all respects, you know, be it in conflict prevention and peace mediation or development cooperation in different realms, or then more lately in climate change and technology and innovation, for example. And particularly on peace mediation, of course, as alluded to by the other speakers already, it's quite striking that even though women and girls are most affected by conflict, they are mostly not at the negotiation tables for peace. So we have tried to work on this by building a network of women peace negotiators, and we're also helping other countries do the same. And now I end by coming back to our National Action Program on Women, Peace and Security, and the fourth edition, which is just out, as alluded to by the Minister. And there we have concrete objectives on the area of water diplomacy and the integration of women into international water diplomacy. And here, why we have chosen this theme, it also comes from our national history, because we have quite a problematic and complex, but at the end of the day, successful history of transboundary water body negotiations with our neighboring countries, from which we carry on into our international collaboration efforts.
Thank you. There. Yeah, that's great. It's amazing in the sense that this day that we're noting as an historic day is happening in 2023, because I recall that the former Kenyan environment minister and environmental activist and women's rights activist Wangari Maathai actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000 and was it 4 or 5, round about that. Yet here we are today where we're actually discussing this topic. But before we go to our conversation, I think we may have the President of Kosovo here. We indeed do have the President of Kosovo? Yes or no? We don't have the President of Kosovo. We don't. Okay, good. Well, that's fine, as long as it's a yes or a no. Oh, yes, we do have the President of Kosovo. Fantastic. Hello. No, don't worry about it. We're going to... President, I'm the moderator, and I'd love to welcome you to the stage, if you can do. This is the President of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani, and we understand, President, that getting from one place to another in these COPs is not quite like a normal day down to the shops, is it? It's really complex.
Well, I really want to apologize for being late, but yes. It was more complex than we initially planned, but I'm so very happy to join you all this morning. Minister Tavio, dear Deputy Executive Director Hendricks, panelists and participants. I'm really delighted to be with all of you today, and I must say it's a great way to start the day. Also, we actually had a very early start, but dealing with a lot of other issues. But when I read the title of this session, I started thinking, what's actually my peace? And I realized that my peace is only possible in a world where my twin daughters and all the daughters, all the girls, all the women in the world are exposed to equal opportunities, equal access to decision and policy-making roles, and a world where safety and security thrive as a result of communication, cooperation, and equality. With global challenges becoming even more complex, the role of women in bold and transformative action is not only important, but it's also existential. And so is the case when we speak of climate action. Today, while the world is facing a myriad of crises, with armed conflicts all around the world, with social unrests, violations of fundamental human rights and freedoms, economic hardships, the climate crisis is even more evident, mercilessly affecting livelihoods all across our planet. While no one is spared from its consequences, it's the women and the girls that are hit the hardest. To make up for its disproportional and discriminatory effect, proportional and equitable funding becomes a necessity to offset the gravity of the hardships that they are regularly exposed to. Unfortunately, some more than others. Yet, it is absolutely essential to avoid seeing women simply as victims, as they are indeed some of the most formidable leaders at the forefront of our battle for a secure, peaceful, and sustainable world. Today, as we explore tangible synergies between the WPS agenda, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Sendai Framework, and other relevant instruments, we recognize the disproportionate impacts on women and girls, and we acknowledge the transformative power embedded in women leadership across peace and climate action. As a result of escalating competition for natural resources, water and land, coupled with the limited access to financial services, rapid technological advancement, and heightened food insecurity, the plight of women and girls has intensified, deepening the roots of poverty. Amidst the climate crisis, their vulnerability aggravates in conflict zones, manifesting in an upsetting rise in sexual violence during conflict, with early child marriages, attacks on human rights defenders, and way much more. This grim reality not only perpetuates gender inequality, but it also amplifies the risks of destabilization and heightened tensions. Our objectives are clear: to expand the understanding of the Women, Peace and Security agenda as the framework for delivering resilience to climate change and complex crises, and to provide a platform for women peace builders to engage in a global climate change dialogue. While women are set and determined to make their contribution, we need more women and girls at both the local as well as central level decision making. But first and foremost, we need to stop looking women as mere bystanders, because the reality is that they are the architects of resilience. This is the story of the women of Kosovo, the embodiment of resilience both in times of war as well as in times of peace. And I speak with conviction when I say that resilience is and will define also the fight of women and girls in Asia and all around the world as they grapple with the impacts of climate change. Over the years, Kosovo has not only promoted the WPS agenda, it has actually become the true champion of it. Back in 2021, as part of the Summit for Democracy led by President Biden, Kosovo committed to important objectives and targets for women empowerment and fostering gender equality. 2 years later, I am delighted to say that Kosovo has put itself on the global map by hosting the International Forum on Women, Peace and Security, which this coming year will also focus on climate security and the way how it impacts the lives of women and girls around the world. Soon, our country will become a permanent regional center of excellence for women, peace and security, where the correlation between climate crisis, where the correlation between climate crisis and the peace and security for women will be actively and permanently explored. By doing so, we aim not only to advance gender equality, climate change solutions, and peace and security outcomes, but most importantly, to pave the way forward for a world where the benefits of the WPS approach are felt across societies. Amidst these challenges, we witness a powerful force, the force of women who refuse to be passive victims, who who embrace their agency to shape a resilient, peaceful, and sustainable future. With this in mind, I am very much confident that what's your peace will not remain a mere question, but a stark reminder of the necessity to turn our action into blueprints for a world where gender equality is not negotiable, but it's existential. And peace is not just a desired outcome, but a shared responsibility where each and every one of us, women and men alike, give our contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, President. Being an old newspaper journalist myself, I do like a bit of news, and to have some news like that is really fantastic. It's something to really celebrate today, I think. Yeah, and it could be a beacon for similar centres to be set up in other parts of the world where they're absolutely critically needed. Well done, very good. When we're not, well, we're sort of on schedule, but we are running close to the wire. So let's just come back to our two wonderful guests here in the middle. Are there one or two, maybe not two, but one project that you have been involved in, or one project you worked on, where you feel that this nexus that we're talking about today has truly been expressed, and that there have been some one or two, clear, tangible outcomes that you feel have moved the needle forward? Could you think?
Right. So I would like to start by saying that climate change should be looked at as a multiplying factor rather than a singular event on its own. It's a threat multiplier. So even when we look at things like gender-based violence, we see that if we look at the causes, you have poverty, you have basic resources or lack thereof, you have conflict, displacement, stressful situations at home and the like. All of these things are multiplied when climate change comes into action. And I can share a story from a recent project that I did with UN Women, where there was this woman in Sindh, in a rural area of Sindh called Thatta. She was pregnant at the time of the flood, and she was giving birth while the flood struck. So she gave birth to the child survived. Her in-laws and her family had to take the child and move to safety because she could not be moved. So her husband stayed with her until she died a slow death during the flood. This situation could have entirely been avoided because climate change was the multiplying factor here. A similar story in Gilgit-Baltistan region, in the rural areas of Gilgit-Baltistan, I think it was called Buber, a Buber village, and this community lives right next to a river. And the river is fine even when it's flooded. The only problem is that there is a huge walnut tree in the middle of the river. So whenever there's a huge inflow of water, the walnut tree directs the water towards the community. So this two men decided to cut down the walnut tree when they heard that the flood was coming. So they were cutting down the tree while the flood struck. And they were buried under the rubble and their bodies were retrieved after 5 months. And I know these stories are gruesome, but they really highlight how climate change causes situations that can otherwise be avoided, or that can it exacerbates existing problems that are in society.
Yeah. Some thoughts there, yeah. A project where it seems to be working rather than not working, if there is such an example.
Yes, in my part of the country, in the Philippines, it's predominantly Muslim, but there are significant populations of indigenous groups that have not converted to Islam. So these predominantly Muslim leaders of a former rebel group are now the leaders of this region, called the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. But they have installed policies that have become exclusive for the predominantly Muslim members of the community, sidelining the indigenous peoples in the area. So I call them second-order minorities because in the floods of 2022, October 2022, the first groups of people who were struck heavily were the indigenous peoples groups. They live in the slope of a mountain which has been heavily mined and heavily harvested of lumber, and they naturally live in a concave space, And so when floods come, they are the first ones to be hit. And on that day, for Typhoon Nalgae, in October 2022, more than 60 people died because they were covered by stones and floodwaters brought about by that typhoon. But an expression of social exclusion happened when the local chief executive, who is a Muslim, said, "Oh, don't continue the search anymore because it's already done, because they are, after all, indigenous people." So that's a manifestation of social exclusion.
I was thinking about what you said earlier, you know, which is that in some places, women have simply not been taught how to swim.
Yes.
And then when the floods come, they die because they can't swim.
Yes, it's the
I was
same
thinking
thing.
back to my own childhood. My mother couldn't swim. That was, you know, in Britain a long time ago now. But now that doesn't happen in the UK. All girls are taught how to swim. So these things can change very quickly, can't they? But only if somebody shows some leadership, something as simple as the act of being able to swim that could save your life in a flood, but the women haven't been taught. Yeah.
If I could just add something, the executive director earlier talked about how there's an overlap between vulnerability to climate change and low inclusion and participation and high conflict and violence. So when we look at other marginalized communities as well, such as disabled people, they also experience the same issues. So I feel that in Pakistan, working with these communities, it wasn't just about the women, it was about the marginalization rather than about the gender.
Right.
So I think the underlying issue, especially I can only talk about Pakistan, is that women need to come out of marginalization or need to be brought out of marginalization in order to stop facing these impacts. Because I'm also a woman in Pakistan, but I don't face these issues because I'm not from a marginalized community. So I feel like the marginalization has a big role to play over here.
But there are some other issues as well, aren't there? I mean, there are many women around the world, particularly in developing countries, that don't have access to bank accounts, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, this seems... And yet, at the same time, there's also a lot of evidence that women in Africa, for example, are fantastic entrepreneurs, and that some of the solar systems that are sold across certainly East Africa, in Rwanda, Burundi, and Kenya, are women-led small businesses that actually get the solar panels into the houses at a price that everybody can afford, and hey presto, the kids can learn in the evening with light when they're at school, and all the benefits that flow from having electrification of clean energy. So there are just so many issues here that need to be addressed. Some are cultural. I think in probably many cases it's cultural or historic that need to be overcome. Why is it taking so long? Why can't we move the needle faster on this?
There are structures that impede all these efforts to make women at the forefront of all these efforts to address both climate change and conflict consequences. Because of the very rigid patriarchal relations, women are allowed to be in negotiating tables as long as they are appointed by the men. As long as they also come from non-marginalized groups, meaning the elite of society, they can be recognized as such. But for the poorest and marginalized indigenous peoples who are always excluded, they always are not honored as negotiators. They negotiate, but they are not being credited for that. It's the male members of their communities that get the credit.
Have you follow up on that?
Yeah, so I call this the feedback loop from hell. It's the vulnerability to climate change feeds into socioeconomic crisis, which also feeds into vulnerability to climate change, and it just goes on and on. And both of these things then feed into conflict and worsening peace and security situations. And so when someone's stuck in a developmental rut where they can't get out of it, so these sort of situations just keep them things as status quo because they cannot afford to think beyond changing things as they are.
But the flip side is that if more women were running the show, there's a lot of evidence that they understand that something like climate change is a long-term issue, better than men do. Men tend to be a bit more short-term, women tend to think a bit more long-term. And the result is they can see the consequences of what's happening and adjust to try and deal with them, especially looking after the families, etc. Whereas the men, as we know, all run off to the cities and hope they can get some... I'm sorry, I'm kind of making this simple language because we're streaming this to people around the world, yeah. But, I mean, if more women were in positions of authority in their communities and societies, there seems to be good evidence that indeed they can help deal with climate change better than the male members of that community. And I'm just making this last point because I'm told we have to wrap up. The lady over there is very strong and she went like that, which I thought, oh my God, yeah. And, but I wanted to give Finland the very last word because you wanted to say something and you're hosting us here and we're very pleased to be with Finland.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to highlight what Amira was, I think, pointing to, which is the intersectionality of vulnerability, that you have gender overlapping with minority status in cases and sometimes even with like impairments. And these overlap on each other and they like make it doubly or triply difficult to get your voice heard. And this is something that must be worked upon also by the aid community, I think, and must be recognized. So wanted to highlight that.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of work to do in this area. I can see that. But it's so important. This event today, the streaming and this broadcast here is not the end of the story, of course. There's a lot more to do. But I do want to thank the President of Kosovo 1,000% because she not only did a good speech, but she actually came with some news that shows that things can change. So thank you very much indeed, President. Okay. Thank you, everybody here. Thank you to our wonderful guests. Thank you to UN Women, and thank you to Finland.
Thank you.
Right.